So, for those who didn't hear earlier, Tom Trowbridge, I'm a co-founder of Fluence. We're going to talk about staking, but first I want to give a little introduction as to what Fluence is. All right, so we do something very similar to what Aethir does, except we're currently focused on the CPU market. And so when you think about GPUs versus CPUs, GPUs are incredibly hot, and I think everyone knows AI is scaling in one direction. But there are billions of CPUs out there. And someone asked me the other day, what do CPUs do? And I'm like, well, they do everything except AI training. Like literally everything we do, for those who don't know, right? So CPUs perform all the calculations on all the applications on your phone, at your office, in the sky, everywhere. And so we are cloudless compute, and that means we're decentralized, resilient, low cost, and verifiable. And so we're going to go into what that means, but it's a decentralized network of CPUs, which ends up being far lower cost than the centralized ones, and it's also resilient. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But this is why cloudless, why you would want to go cloudless. You're decentralized, no one entity controls it. You're self-healing from failures. You can be 80% cheaper. And the reason you're cheaper is because it's an open network. And so you can switch from one provider to another with no friction. And when you can switch with no friction, you have no price, there's no pricing power on those providers. So price is continually competed down to the lowest possible cost. And I think that is also another reference to Mark into why even if there's AI bubble, if there's an AI bubble now and it goes away, if you can switch among GPU providers, you're going to go to the lowest possible price. It's also verifiable, and you can choose. We have providers who only run on renewable energy. So that's another compelling feature here. And you know, why does this matter? And it matters because the cloud right now is dominated by 3 companies on the screen that everybody here knows of. And people use them because they are pretty much the only alternative. And they're relatively easy to use, but they come at a cost. And that cost is very expensive to leave, sort of the Roach Motel, you know, check in when you want, you can't check out. And they have the ability to deplatform and censor users, and they're closed ecosystems. So the problem is that all of Web3, where we value decentralization, actually runs on these clouds. Infura does, OpenSea, Rarible, everybody runs on the cloud. Blockchain nodes run in the cloud. So our whole ecosystem is basically running on centralized infrastructure. That is not a enduring or durable or safe way for our infrastructure to run. And that's not by any that's not done by design. It's done because we haven't had a decentralized solution right now, up until now, that makes this is actually an alternative. So that's what Fluence is working to provide. And why does it win? Why does cloudless ultimately win? It's because you have an open platform, you have low fees or no fees, and the costs are competed down. And so you end up with a very low cost platform. And when it's an open platform, that encourages innovation. So when anyone can build, and when you release a product or you release a software module on an open compute platform, as long as any provider in the world wants to host that or is paid to host it, it continues to run. It will not be shut down. So you're not subject to forced upgrade cycles. You can't be cut off of a software module or even a program, because once it's out there, it just runs, right? And then you can build on it with certainty of not being cut off. And when you know, the example is a Facebook with I'm just blanking on it, with the Farmville, right? Hugely successful application. Facebook cut it off because it was sucking users away. In an open world, you would be able to have the Farmville on top of an open Facebook. You would have then something built on top of Farmville. You'd keep building without the ability to cut that off. When you have that, you have massive innovation potential. And so how do you enable this? You enable it by a platform like Fluence, where you have global providers, enterprise grade, like what Mark said, we start with top tier data centers. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, but we're starting with 6 class 4 data center providers that host their hardware in the same facilities as the leading Web 2 companies. That is, I think, a very, very important element to getting adoption, as Mark said. Verified capacity, very low pricing, and stablecoin payments and DAO governance. And I'll talk about this later, but Helium mentioned governance. We were started with the DAO from day one. to make sure that governance is at the center of how we do this, and payments are done not in our token, but in stablecoin. I think that's also a critical component, and if with a fiat front end to come, I think that is a critical component to adoption, is not requiring your own token for payment. And these are the milestones, which is where we are. We're going to talk about staking today, so we're going to click that one off. And then we have CPU virtual machines. That is also effectively live now, with GPU VMs to come, Docker as well. And so I think we're going to be pretty much through the 3 of these by the end of this year, with much more to come. And that's why we think that cloudless is the next generation of compute. And so you think about this evolution. We started off with mainframes in corporate environments. And over time, that moved to the cloud. And people went to the cloud because it was cheaper, and it was more reliable, and it was more resilient, and it was not the core expertise of any of these companies that were hosting mainframes internally. Those same reasons are going to be why people move to a cloudless future. It will be cheaper. It is cheaper, more resilient. You'll have more product and more choices. And it's also will be outside. It's not necessary to have core expertise in this area. So almost all the reasons you move to cloud, you will move to cloudless. And by the way, Fluence this is what we do. There are other people in this area, in this sector as well. It may be Fluence, it may be others, but convinced that a open network of compute is where the world goes. And that is, I think, for some of the reasons that Mark mentioned, but that is where it goes, because if it can be decentralized and you can compete costs down, you ultimately will do better. The other point here is you may have seen that there was a Hivemapper made an announcement yesterday that they, in 2 years, mapped more roads than Google did in 10 years. Right? No one can compete with Google head to head, but when you have a global community, you actually can. And that's sort of what we're talking about here. No one can compete with Amazon. No company is going to compete with Amazon unless you're Google. But if you have a global network, then you have a shot. And that's what we're building, and that's what we're building and enabling. And so that's why this market is so big. You know, we're talking about where's this market go, and rather than try to compete away from existing cloud business now, which is difficult, this market is growing tremendously. And so we can be successful by just capturing the new market growth, which is coming. And this has to do with infrastructure, edge compute, Web3 nodes. Huge amount of this growth is coming. And that is the easier part to get than trying to displace an incumbent. So our focus is how do we get and where do we get traction in the new areas which are growing, rather than displace the existing cloud in many of their core areas. And these are some metrics for Fluence. We just completed a stake race. We had 15,000 people compete in our stake race to basically a way to reward our community with Fluence tokens. And there'll be a second iteration of the stake race coming, so stay tuned. It's a way for us to reward our community and reward people who are engaged with Fluence and help educate more people about it. We have a terrific amount of compute capacity committed, about $100 million worth of hardware. We're going to onboard that very slowly because we don't want to overwhelm the network and we want to scale it with actual demand. But the amount of interest, not just from consumers, but from actual data centers, is tremendous. And this is also because everyone's focused on GPUs. And so being a CPU provider is a real advantage in generating this. And you know, our community is about 70,000 and growing quickly. So let's talk tokens, because I think this is something that is kind of touched on at a lot of talks, but people, I think, are so conditioned from to not talk about tokens. But it's really important because that's what's I think a real differentiator in DePIN overall. So talk about this for a little bit. So DePIN, it's not a meme. And I mentioned this in my intro for those of you who weren't here, but if you think about crypto is so meme focused, and I think memes are powerful and they're engaging and they're going to be compelling for sure, but DePIN is different. Because even if you think of L1s, most L1s, is there real traction? Are transactions real? Are they really generating terrific value? Or are people investing because other people are investing, because other people think it's interesting, and you end up with effectively meme-based investments? DePIN is different. DePIN is actually generating revenue. Mark talked about customers. You don't hear that discussion of customers very often when you're talking in the crypto landscape. And so what this means, though, there's some good news and bad news. Good news is I think it's going to attract a whole new investor base to DePIN projects, because traditional investors will now understand revenue, traction. I get it. This is valuable. This is interesting. But what that means is they're going to dig a lot deeper into token economics. And they're going to know, how is this revenue add and reflected in the token price and in the token scarcity and in token demand. And that is going to be a focus that this industry hasn't seen, because it's been meme focused, and people like this, they buy it. The token economics, we'll worry about it later. That literally most projects, even early DePIN projects, have a difficult time understanding the token economics of their own projects. So let's disaggregate tokens into about 5 categories here. And there's the generation, and then there's the demand or the use. And I think we got to disaggregate these and figure out each one where it works. And I'm going to specify this into DePIN projects. And so let's talk about token for payment. This is an obvious one. All right, so you just heard Aethir talk about you use a token for payment. Filecoin does that, Helium as well. And I think that is interesting. More tokens for payment, more demand for the token. I'm a little skeptical, because payments in tokens, if they're required, certainly slows adoption, right? If you have to pay in that token, that means you have to create a wallet. There's one of these companies, I won't say which, basically said that their customer pipeline dropped at 90% when it came time to install the wallet to buy the token to use the service, right? If that is your fall off, that is a problem. You're not going to scale. So the token for payment is important, but fiat or taking other coins is really important. The other question also is, if the token can be bought and sold just to do the payment, does it really add value? And I think this is very unclear. Token for payment as a demand for the token is entirely unproven. And so I'm not sure this actually generates a lot of value for the token and for the ecosystem. Now, token for rewards. This is core to almost every crypto project, right? So I have a bunch of logos up here. I don't see there's any way to get around this. This is how you bootstrap demand. And I think everyone knows that early demand, bootstrap supply. Early supply is paid for in tokens. And this is proven, it works, and it's also why the DePIN sector has been able to generate a terrific amount of supply in almost every subsector of DePIN. So this will continue. Basically by proving the supply side, it helps attract the demand side. The problem is, how are rewards calibrated? And we just heard from Helium, where they're now worried that the rewards are halving and they're not high enough value. So rewards calibrated an arbitrary token value, they decline over time, and you're also heavily dependent on the crypto market, right? Helium mentioned that the value now is lower, so are they going to incent as much demand, as much supply? If the crypto market doubled, they wouldn't have that concern, but it's really, they're now stuck a little bit with the crypto market movements to generate their and reward their supply side. That's not a great place to be in. So I'm going to talk about a potential solution to that, but how those rewards are calibrated, pretty important. And token governance, I think we can all know what this one is. This is very standard. The one thing I'll mention, I don't think this adds value to the token really, but it's an important piece of decentralization. So it's very important. The one question is there any check on a DAO? And we can have a whole conversation on governance, but I also think it's super important to have a legal wrapper to protect DAO token holders from certain regulatory agencies. But and participation is obviously an issue. But let's talk, this is the most important part, I think, or one of two, buy and burn. Now, this provides a direct link between revenue and token scarcity. And this is what Helium is doing. Helium is now burning around $5,000 worth per day of HNT, right? Unfortunately, that's not quite enough to offset the HNT being issued every day. But as that goes over, if that scales, then it will. And then you're going to have a very interesting economy. But this is a direct link from revenue to the network to token scarcity, right? And the cool thing about this is that, you know, thinking back to the meme conversation, if no one's paying attention to your token, but you're generating revenue and that revenue is buying your token and burning it, over time, the token will go up because there's built-in demand that is just buying it, burning it, buying it, burning it. And as that's deflationary, you're just going to keep on buying and burning it down. And so this, I think, is super a critical piece of DePIN networks, which most networks don't have and can't have at scale. Now, trick is how much? And so on these logos here, there's some burn only 5% of the revenue, buy and burn, and some burn 80%. So the details here matter a lot. I think GeoNet is at the 80% range, and they're speaking coming up soon. XNet is also pretty high up there as well. So I think that is something you really want to pay attention to. I think that is, this is, I think, a compelling piece. You'll see more and more projects move towards. And this is kind of the last one. What I'm really going to talk about is tokens for staking. Now, for retail hardware, consumer hardware, staking is usually not important. If I'm doing a Hivemapper camera in my car, I don't need to stake. I've bought this device from Hivemapper. There isn't a ton of value, and it's also a little would be a little unusual for Hivemapper to say, hey, buy this $500 camera and then stake on top of it. Don't really need that. But for the virtual, the digital services that we've seen, that you need stake because you have to prove that those machines are doing the work, and you have to get trust. So where you need trust, you need stake. And trust happens on the digital side of this all. So it aligns incentives when you have stake in DePIN networks. And it allows customers to rely on unknown parties because they know that if the parties don't operate appropriately, they will be slashed. So you're tied in and linked economically. Now, challenge is, how is stake calibrated? What is that amount? You know, Filecoin, stake is 30% of circulating supply. Circulating supply could be worth $1 billion, could be worth 100 billion, could be worth 100 million. Right, it's just 30% of it. I don't think that is necessarily the most compelling way to calibrate what stake should be. Are providers required to stake, i.e., or can you have delegated stake? I think you want delegated stake as well. And how does stake relate to the value of the services? Another key point. So we're going to get into that in a little bit. And that's why I think staking moves and evolves to delegated stake. Most digital service DePINs require stake from their hardware providers. I think that is limiting, and it's limiting because it doesn't give the community an ability to participate. It also raises costs for your providers. It also limits providers to those that actually want to buy the token and be involved in the ecosystem. So I think for multiple reasons, the evolution of this is going to be community and investor staking, where you have providers, their job is hardware, they provide the hardware, someone else, their job is understand the token economics, buy the token, hold the token. These are two very different businesses. They come together and the staker just shares the reward with the hardware provider. This should be disaggregated. We have disaggregated. Others, I think, will continue to disaggregate this. So we're launching staking on Fluence. And so this is where we go with this. So why staking? Secures the network. Who can stake? Anyone can stake. You don't need to have the hardware to stake. You can stake to provider. And who are you staking to? Top tier data centers. And I'll show you exactly who they are. So how does staking work? It is per CPU, and this is, I think, important, $12,000 per CPU in FLT. So this goes back to my point about how is it determined? Well, it's determined by a dollar amount, but you pay in a token, and the token rewards are also in FLT, but calibrated to a dollar amount as well. And then you split, that's a 20-80 split, which we think is what's going to happen, but it's not under our control. And what this allows is it allows, if the token goes down, you get more tokens to more calibrate towards that dollar reward. Token goes up, you actually get fewer tokens, but you're still targeting that dollar amount. And I think this is really important because it makes a sustainable ecosystem, you know, within bounds, right? So you know if you stake, you're pretty clear what you're going to get. Token goes down, you're still getting more tokens, you're getting more reward. And if you're a provider, this is really important because you are sure you can cover your costs, because you're getting more, you're getting a much more of a certainty about the value you're achieving over time. And so who are you staking to? These are the top tier kind of data center providers that are signed up to be part of the Fluence launch. And these all operate in top tier data centers around the world. 2 of these operate only renewable data centers. So pretty exciting. These are Australia, Poland, US, Asia, kind of all over, which is exciting. We've got some big names coming as well. And so this is also the math as to where this can go with Fluence. It's a per core, but if you just think about this for a second, when we onboard the equivalent of one medium-sized data center, that would require $300 million in FLT to be staked. That's bigger than our market cap right now, our fully diluted market cap. Right, and the Amazon one Amazon data center is twice that size. So what we're driving to here is if you can predict the amount of data centers and the amount of CPUs online, you can make an assessment as to what demand there will be for stake. That, I think, is a pretty important component for people who are evaluating DePIN projects to understand. And so if you're staking, look at this. 2 things matter. How long is the contract? Between 1 month and 1 year. Be sure you know if it's a month or a year. That makes a difference. It's how long you're locking up your Fluence. And what's the delegation rate? We think it's going to be around 20%, but it may be up to 30, 40 by certain providers, depending for the variety of reasons. So I would pay attention to these 2 components when you're looking at staking your tokens. And staking is live. So we have just launched staking today. So you can go to Fluence.network and you can stake if you are not in the US. Unfortunately, it's not open to US residents, but it is live, which we're super excited about. And the Parasail staking pool is coming as well, which is shortly. So we're very excited to announce that. So we will. So with that announcement, I think I want to thank you all for coming and want to welcome our next panel. So thank you for your attention. Appreciate it, everybody.